Hello, everyone. It's coming up on 2 o'clock on the West Coast where it is getting warmer here in Las Vegas. I think it's in the 80s right now, which for us is lovely. It feels very cool, but it's been a cool winter. And I know that the Midwest, where I also live, is going to be getting a blizzard, apparently. We did our level 2 training in February up at Mount Charleston, where we had a blizzard. So I'm hoping that wherever you are, you're having a wonderful time and enjoying this seasonal change. I hope it's not too taxing for you. Today, I wanted to talk about, I look at patterns, themes, trends, things kind of coming up in my clinical practice and with my students. And I'm really pleased to report that many people on the planet are committed to a life of balance and a life of health and well being. And I think more than ever before, we have access to resources online and everywhere that can help us manage and balance and harmonize our lives. I had a client the other day, a veteran, and we've been working together for a while. We've been working together probably for a year, and I started to get a sense that he has an expectation that 24/7 he should be blissfully, giddily happy, and that there should never be any challenges, and that there should never be any anxiety, and there should never be any sadness or any triggering things. And actually, it kind of stopped me in my tracks. But that was true. I said, "Are you kind of a perfectionist?" And he goes, "Oh yeah, I am." And he says, we've been working together for a year, and I don't, I'm still having issues. I still get anxiety every once in a while. I still feel depressed every once in a while. And then went on to say, he goes, it's not nearly as bad, and a lot of the bad thoughts have gone away, and I've certainly made progress. But when am I going to be completely cured? When am I going to be completely healed? When am I done with therapy? When do I declare this over? When do I put my demons to rest? And so on. And I think it's a great question. So today I want to talk about this idea of, you know, when is enough enough? What constitutes mental health treatment anyway? At what point are we just normal humans going through normal vagaries of life, cycles, and rhythms? When do you seek mental health treatment or coaching or, whatever your modality is? And then are we ever done? I mean, is it ever good enough? Are we ever enough? Have we ever figured things out so much that we don't need help, that we don't need support? We don't need to reach out or talk to anybody. Sorry, I keep jumbling this computer. Um, you know, I'm going to chunk way up. It is said that spiritually we are here to learn. I just saw a clip of Sylvia Brown, my good friend. I call her my friend. I met her once or twice. A noted psychic of the 20th century. It's been dead for a few years now. Lovely woman, a real interesting woman. And I learned a lot long before I was into Huna or mental health or anything else. And I read all of her books. She wrote dozens and dozens of books. Excellent books, really easy to read. And I encourage you, if you like the new age, you like psychic phenomena, you like concepts of the other side and the spiritual realms. She writes extensively and exhaustively on all of those topics. And one of my favorite books is Adventures of a Psychic. I forget some of the others, but really good. You could just search under Sylvia Brown, and it's SilviaBrowne. And her point of view, as she would say, that she channels or that she's a medium or psychic or whatever it is, that our purpose here is to learn. This is a school, it's the Earth School. And that on the other side, we have different lives. She also says that the other side isn't a place really far away. It's more of a vibrational difference or a frequency based difference, which I don't necessarily understand. Since time immemorial, we've thought of heaven as up there and hell down here. And, the different religions have their different versions of what heaven and hell is, and that heaven's a good place and hell is a bad place. And the Buddhists have their ideas of what hell is. And um, it's a life state, life condition, if you will, a hellish life condition. And I think it's interesting. She says that we're here to learn. Now, if you buy that argument, learning is by definition uncomfortable. Now, I love learning. I'm a lifelong learner. I know many of you that study with me are also lifelong learners. Um, but think about it. Think about anything you've learned. Anything. I use the driving a stick shift car, or getting your. I work with a lot of physicians going through residency, going through your training. I work with a lot of therapists going through the training, learning. I have a teaching facility here, um, and I have to, as a teacher, remember that there are different levels of abilities, and that people and look at your children, look at just developmental stages, and some of the most inspiring creatures on the planet are 1-year olds trying to learn how to walk. They try to stand up, they fall down. They don't care. They're not emotionally upset about it. They try to stand up, they fall down, they get up, and they keep figuring it out until they start walking. And I think that's really inspiring, because so many of us get so frustrated with our learning that we'll stop, we'll quit, we'll stop midstream and say, I just can't do this. This is ridiculous. This is too hard. Why does it have to be this hard? And then if you look at the training, there's Maslow's stages of learning, which you've heard me talk about, which is this idea that before we know anything, we're unconsciously incompetent. We don't know that we don't know. We don't know what we don't know. We're clueless, right? Think about driving a stick shift car. Think about and I learned on a stick shift car, a 1971 Toyota Corolla, if you must know, my brothers. Now, my mom had the 71 Impala, which was an automatic, but he took me to the school parking lot in his 71 Toyota Corolla. And I'm thinking to myself, as a then 14-year-old or 15-year-old, whenever I started to learn to drive, um, how hard can it be? My brother does it. My mom does it. My sister does it. People who I think are kind of not so capable do it. How hard can it be? And then I want you to, as I'm going through these stages, I want you to reflect on your residency or your training or raising your children or your jobs or whatever skills you've accomplished. And many of you, all of you that I work with, are masterful, in what you've done. And so I want you to kind of reflect on that process of learning, because there's method in my madness here, as there always is. I'll get to the point about learning and about where we are and about suffering and about, must we have to go through these obstacles to become better. So I get to the Chaska High School parking lot in Minnesota, and he puts me, and my brother really is patient, but I think any teenager, now my brother's 10 years older. So when I was 14, 15, he was in his mid 20s, and he was living with us. He had not gotten married and moved out of the house yet. And he was kind of like my father figure, and he was helping me, and he was really pretty patient. Well, I had not done driver's training at all, but in driver's training, it occurs to me they don't teach you how to drive a stick shift. They don't even talk about. They talk about road rules and signs and laws and speed limits and that kind of stuff. But they don't say this is a clutch and this is a gas pedal and this is a brake and this is a gear shift and these are how many gears and this is why there are gears and that kind of thing. So he puts me in the driver's seat. We're in a parking lot. It's like a Sunday, completely empty, thank God. And what do you imagine the first thing that I do when I try to start the car moving? He's trying to tell me by guiding me. Of course, as you know, I stall the car. I let the clutch out too fast. I put too much gas. I'm not got that whole thing going on very well yet. And I stall out the car. Then, of course, I forget to use the clutch and I grind the gears, which is a really unpleasant sound. And he's starting to get really upset. And you know the drill. And so in that afternoon, I don't know how long he tolerated it, but I think by the end of our driving lesson, I was able to at least get the car moving in a forward direction. I mean, God knows we didn't try reverse or anything. We're just in a big open parking lot. And we did that a few times. Now, if you think fast forward to today, many of you drive home from your places of business and you don't even remember how you got there. You are so masterful and so unconscious when you drive. And that's what Maslow says. And so if the clueless state is you don't know that you don't know, you don't know what you don't know. Meaning I didn't know. I mean, I don't know. I thought, like, how hard could driving be? Everybody does it. I should, I mean, other people do it. I should go. Or, think about the birth of your child. Females. Think, well, or males, anybody having a child, the birth of a child. It's been done a couple times. I'm joking here. It's been done a few times on the planet, and it's quite a thing. And if you have not done it and have not witnessed it and have not been around for the birth of a baby, that's a life-changing, well, literally life-changing, life-creating thing. And I've been present at, I don't want to say many, I'm going to say several. I worked in an ER, so I delivered. This is funny. I am not a medical doctor. I'm certainly not an obstetrician. I have a PhD, not an MD, but I worked as the social worker in a trauma center in LA County. And when I say, you know, I like to say I've delivered two babies. The reality is, two babies delivered themselves onto me because I couldn't get the doctor to get there. It's a long story, but my office was closest to the waiting room in the emergency department. And, you know, people come in two times in my 10 years in the ER. Uh, Two families came in, and I got a call from FEAR, said we really need some help out here. So I came out, and I'm helping the families just get into the what we would call the OBGYN room. We had a room in the ER dedicated to that kind of stuff. And you know, two times babies happened. I have no skill. I did not get to bill for it. I'm at one particular time I'm on the floor, and the baby just kind of popped out. And the doctor who on staff that time came down. And he just looks. He goes. And he joked. He was like, "Well, it looks like you've got this handled. You don't need me." And it was just, it was funny. We laughed about it, and it was a wonderful outcome. And the baby was fine, and everybody lived happily ever after. And if you haven't been through that, you could think, well, how hard can it be? And I can hear the parents going, "Pretty frickin' hard." It's a thing. And so you move through these stages in life. So let's just chunk back up. And we go through our paces, and that all of life is learning, really. Change requires constant learning, and the way life is changing right now. I was interviewed for a documentary yesterday on AI and social media, and the impact of social media on our kids and on society, and the impact of AI on all those things. And it was an interesting conversation that we had yesterday on camera about. And the question was, am I seeing more dysfunction by virtue of AI? Am I seeing statistically more addiction? Am I seeing more social media addiction or screens addiction, video gaming and things like that? And what I said, which is true given my experience, and again, I have a weird lens because I'm in a clinic, I'm in a clinical setting right now. We have thousands and thousands of patients. And statistically, addiction, again, social media addiction, people coming in saying, "Oh my God, I'm addicted to this and I need help and I need rehab for my phone." No, it rarely, really happens. What does happen is parents will bring their video gaming children in, or their social media, uh, TikTok obsessed teenagers in, and hand them to us and say, "Please fix my child," because they're, so addicted to the gaming. And we make better distinctions about that, in terms of, really in terms of what um, constitutes an addiction and when does it become a problem and that kind of thing. And so change requires constant learning. I'm a lifelong learner. People ask me at my age, kind of, when are you done? When are you done learning? When are you done growing? When are you done evolving? When are you done with goals and objectives and that kind of? My point of view is never. Um, I don't think you ever are. Had the great fortune of taking care of Aunt Lillian, who was born in 1900. She was my mom's aunt. I think she was my mom. No, she was my great aunt. She was my mom's aunt. And she lived to be 100 years old. Well, that's not true. She lived to be 93. She died in 1993. And in the nursing home, the last couple of years of her life, she tried to create value. She was a very Christian woman, And when I would come and visit, we would talk and loved her. When she was a little higher functioning, she'd take me to lunch. And this is Los Angeles, and she took me to the Brown Derby, and she took me to the Bullock's tea room. The fancy old ladies who lunch places. Took me to the Polo Lounge in Beverly Hills. And showed me kind of old Hollywood. Her husband was an actor, a Hollywood actor, and had a great time. And then when she just got older and was had difficulty. Um, Managing things. She went into a nursing home, and I would still visit her, and we would have long conversations. And she did say, I just don't know what my purpose is. I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. I don't know what, and she would say it in a Christian sense. I don't know what God wants from me, not in an angry way, just, but I'm not sure why he's keeping me here so long. Like there must be a reason why I'm still here. I got to have something to do. And I visited, I wouldn't visit every day, but I visited a lot of times, 2, 3 times a week. I was working in restaurants. And so I was working in the evenings, and the restaurant happened to be very close to where she was living. And so I would just stop by on my way to work. If I had to be at work the restaurant by 6 p.m., I'd stop by around dinner time, like 4:30, 5 o'clock in the nursing home. And, we would chat, and I wouldn't stay long. And I remember one day I walked in and she said, Patrick, I finally got it. I figured out. Um, and I'm sitting in her room, and she's in her bed, her hospital bed. And she's sharing a room with another person, another woman. And she pointed over to her roommate who was asleep. And she said, she pointed to her roommate. She goes, that's Mildred, and not her real name. And I have figured out that what I'm supposed to be doing is caring for her. And I'm here in this time to care for her because she's having a much harder time than I am. And I learned later that Mildred was in a coma. I mean, she was vegetative. She wasn't on a ventilator or anything. She was breathing on her own, but she was basically vegetative. And so every day, Aunt Lillian would care for and talk to and help and advocate for Mildred until such time that Aunt Lillian had a stroke, a pretty bad stroke. The first stroke didn't kill her, but she was aphasic. She had facial droop. She couldn't talk. And then I would visit her, and she had a very expressive eye. She couldn't talk. And I would hold her hand, and we would kind of telepathically communicate. And she was angry, about a bit about, why has God done this to me? Why can't I just go be with him? Why do I have to be in this state? And as many seniors, elderly patients do, she contracted pneumonia and passed away in not very long, and that kind of happened. But I mean, she was 93. All that. My point is, Viktor Frankl says, in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, that humans by their very nature are always looking to create value and looking to make a difference and looking to better themselves. And you can say what you want about the human race, but we have found that to be true, right? That people by and large are good. I know we have examples of evil, we have examples of people doing bad things, but statistically, most humans, and now remember, I work in mental health, and I've worked in prisons, and I've worked in jails, and I've worked with serial killers, and I've worked with pedophiles and sex offenders. And I'm still going to say, after 40 years of practice, I find that people are by and large good. They want to do right. And that statistically, it's a relatively small amount of people. People ask me, is there more child abuse than there used to be? Is there more sexual assault than there used to be? Is there more domestic violence? Is there more drug use? Is there more crime? And it's an interesting question. And I say, and you can do the research, you could look it up, I don't think so. I think there always has been domestic violence. There always has been assault. There always has been crime. We just didn't have a 24-hour news cycle and internet and, TikTok, where every little detail is, blazoned all over the internet. And so I say that by way of saying that, back to this documentary, you have to be careful and mindful what you ingest media-wise, because can be really destabilizing. I have one guy, another guy, a veteran, older guy, he's in his 70s, and he's got Fox News 24 hours a day on loud in his house. Now he lives alone, and he and his dog, and he comes into session, and we talk about, because I talk about it, he talks about insomnia and he can't sleep. He's older. and he's got PTSD. He's got stuff going on. But my job as a therapist is to say, okay, well, what is influencing you to be so grumpy? What's been influencing you to be so depressed and so angry? And he said, well, just see the state of the world. You see the war, you see the president, you see the economy, you see the gas prices, and he just goes to the races, man. And I said, are you looking at that stuff all the time? He goes, well, of course I am. 24 hours a day, his TV is on with, and I'm just using Fox News as an example, a very conservative kind of a point of view, but it doesn't matter what news you look at. Most news is not very positive. And so we are working with him in terms of insomnia. Homework number one, shut the damn TV off at night, because he's just like, it's just going loud in the background all 24 hours a day. And so, how mindful are you of what you're consuming, what media you're taking in? Uh, because it can be negative, it can be destabilizing. So back to the stages of learning. We don't know. We don't know that we don't know. Then, when I ground the gears, so to speak, I was consciously incompetent. I knew in that moment how clueless I was. I work with a lot of students here at the clinic that all of a sudden they see their first patient, or they do their first assessment or their first anything. Think of the job you had where I remember the first table I waited on. I remember as a graduate student intern at a hospital, the very first time I had to go into a patient's room in the hospital and do my psychological thing. Terrifying, right? But we have to do it. And that's how we do it. Now, here, years later, of course, I'm very masterful at some things, and very much of a beginner at other things. I think I'll always be a beginner at yoga. I think I'll always be a beginner at Pilates. I think I'll always, that kind of thing. I just don't ever feel particularly masterful at some of those things. And then parts of, like driving, pretty good at. I can drive. I can do that pretty well. So we are consciously aware of how clueless we are. Then over time, with some education and some training, we get to be what we call consciously competent, which means that we know how to do the thing. We just need to be aware of it. And that it requires, like, if you think about when you were driving that car, you kind of figured it all out, and you could move the car forward, and then you could even park in a easy parking place. But the parallel parking required some additional attention. And if there was anything that's weird, like parking on a hill or using the stick shift stoplight on a hill, it required some additional kinds of practice and training. And that we would call consciously competent. You weren't putting your makeup on, while on your way to work, or you weren't juggling, and multitasking while you're driving and the radio wasn't on. You had to be focused. And then finally, as you know, the last stage of the four is called unconsciously competent, which means that you can do it with half your brain tied behind your back. And I'd like you to think now about what are those things that you're just so masterful at. I used to be pretty masterful at cooking some things. I'm not. I haven't cooked lately. I don't cook much. And so if I were to, make Thanksgiving dinner, oh my gosh, it's so daunting. My niece made Thanksgiving dinner last year, and it was just so amazing. And I just thought, what a production. I mean, it had the whole thing, the turkey, the stuff, all of it. It was just an amazing, amazing meal. And she said she had great joy producing it. Come to think of it, I don't think I've ever actually produced an entire Thanksgiving or a Christmas dinner by myself. I've contributed to them, I've helped, but that would be a big consciously incompetent thing, if I burned something or whatever. So think about those things you're really masterful at. Think about those things that you're consciously competent to. I work with a lot of surgeons, and when I talk to them about this model, I see a light bulb go off, and I say, what's going on? They say, in surgery, no doubt there are some surgical techniques where you've done them, sutures, and you have certain skills that you learn that you've done so many times. Pilots have to do so much training, and so much of a pilot's training is they would call cellular memory or muscle memory, is that you learn things by virtue of the way you have to move and what you have to touch and all that sort of thing, and that it becomes almost like rote memorization because it's a habit that you get into. And so one of my sons, or many of my sons are pilots, but one of them in particular talked about his pre-flight checklist. as an airplane pilot, a captain in the Air Force. And, and he said, I wish you could sit and watch it because it's really fascinating. Uh, because it's a protocol, and there's certain things that have to be checked, and I of course I don't have any idea what those things are, but he said it's a ritual, and rituals become those consciously incompetent things that we just do quite naturally, and it becomes a habit. And certainly if you're very good at your discipline, if you're doing things that you do very well. Now the surgeons would say there are some of those cases that really keep us on our toes, and we can't afford the luxury of becoming unconsciously competent. And I'm thinking of a couple of the ones that talked to me about this, and I would say, well, so really? He goes, well, yeah. He said the human body is very unpredictable. And he says you don't want to be on too much of an autopilot for some cases. And I'm thinking of neurosurgery, orthopedic surgery, various kinds of cardiothoracic surgery. And I'm just using this as an example because I'm not a surgeon, but surgeons have given me this feedback around this model that, yeah, you don't want to be too mindless. You don't want to be on autopilot too much for some of that stuff. You got to be really alert. And I'm thinking of the surgeon that did some of my surgeries. I had a bunch of surgeries after cancer, and very complicated multi-system surgeries. In fact, I'll just tell you, he of course, with his bedside manner, said, "Okay, you're about to undergo the most difficult surgery the human body could sustain." I went, "What?" He goes, "We're in three organ systems, well, not organ systems, different systems of the body. We're in the gastrointestinal system, the lymph system, and the digestive system," or something like that. Oh, what was it? Urinary system, lymph system, I don't know, adrenal system, I forget. And they were opening them all up at the same time. And there could be cross, contamination, and you got the certain liquids aren't supposed to mix with other liquids. And again, I'm not a medical doctor, but it was daunting. And I said, "Are you gonna?" He goes. I said, "Is this the most difficult surgery you do?" And he goes, "It is. It takes 12 hours, 10 to 12 hours. I'm on my feet. It's three different systems in the body. You're going to come out with a lot of drains, a lot of sutures, a lot of scarring, all that kind of stuff. But we'll save your life." And it did. It's here. Here I am. Josh says I look younger every time. So apparently he did something right. Thank you, Dr. Canetti, University of Chicago. Um, so this is all the way back to the why do we incarnate? Why does it have to be hard? Why do we not grow unless we're challenged? It's true. Think about what you're most proud of. Reflect on your life, your career, your kids, your money, your material things, your body, your health, your well-being, your accomplishments. And I want you to think about, as you came through those things. Now, some of you are older than others. I'm reflecting on a 4-year-old I had not so recently. Cute kid. Most 4-year-olds are cute kids. Came in, he's very serious. And his mom and dad brought him in. I didn't know anything, what was going on. So typically I'll meet with the parents and go over the kid. And then if the kid wants to meet with me by themselves, they can, but it's not necessary. We create safety, and some littler kids just want their parents in the room the whole time. Totally fine. Some littler kids want mom and dad out. They got something that they want to talk about. And this kid was that latter one where he's like, "Okay, mom and dad, I'd like to talk to Dr. Scott by myself." And so I said, they left. I got, and again, what I use the parents for is, gestational age and allergies and medical things and pediatrician and, the typical things parents would know. And then, of course, when they get the kid alone, it's like, "Okay, so what's up?" And he just got very serious. He goes, "I'm starting preschool." And he was just so cute. He was not happy. He was not smiling at all. And "When are we starting preschool?" He said, "I don't want them to know, but I'm really scared." I said, "Okay, let's go." He goes, "I have to leave my dog. I have to go to a different place. I have to interact with strangers. Somewhere I've been told that strangers aren't safe, and now all of them got a new building of strangers. And he was making, from a 4-year-old perspective, he was making perfect sense, about why he was scared and why he didn't want his parents to know. And he was the youngest of like 3 kids, and all the other kids had gone before him. And he didn't want to be like a crybaby, and he didn't want to get bullied by his siblings and blah, blah, blah. And he really needed a strategy for how to, cope with preschools coming up. And oh man, this kid was as serious as a heart attack. It was so cute. And I said, yeah, that sounds heavy. He goes, it is. It really is. He goes, I don't know. I really don't. He goes, I don't. You're not going to tell them that I'm scared. I said, no, your secret's safe with me. I said, sometimes, I said, do you like to color? He goes, I love to color and draw. He goes, yeah. I said, sometimes when I'm chewing on something, I'm working on something, I like to color. So let's get on the floor and let's color and draw. And for a half hour, we colored and draw. I didn't say anything. And I would every once in a while I'd lob in a question. This is a 4-year-old, and he is working through his learning stage, the developmental stage of leaving home the first time, maybe riding on a bus, and he doesn't want to be a crybaby, and he wants to be a big boy, and this is the biggest thing in his life right now, and it's coming up. Now he doesn't know time that well, whether it was a week from now or a month from now or 6 months from now, he knew that the day was going to come when he was going to have to leave home without his parents, without his dog, get on a bus with strangers, go to a building full of strangers. And he made perfect sense. And so we just sat on the floor and we colored. And I would say, so what's the hardest part? Just kind of conversational. So what's the hardest part about this? Man, he laid it out. End of the first session. He just looked at me, said, "You smart kid." He goes, "This was really helpful. Thank you very much." This is a 4-year-old. It's so cute. This was really helpful. Thank you. I feel like I'm better prepared. I said, "Well, this was just one session." He goes, "I know, but I really just want you to know that this was really helpful because, man, I feel better. I think, you know." And I said, "Well, I didn't really do anything." He goes, "No, you didn't." I didn't. I colored with him. I didn't really do it. He goes, "No, but I did." But he goes, "I can't talk with my family about this stuff. It's just too private, So went on. We only did about 2 or 3 sessions. He went to preschool. Probably has his PhD now because it was a few years ago. But understand, whether you're 4, whether you're 1 learning to walk, whether you're 18 going to college, whether you're 30 getting married, having your first child, whether you're getting divorced, a death in the family, a PhD, a graduate degree, a job. Life is full of those developmental milestones that call us to be the best versions of ourselves. And that is a normal part of life. A normal part of life is going through those cycles and rhythms of being clueless about a thing, then figuring out how clueless you are about a thing, then getting some competence about a thing, and then becoming masterful to some degree or another about a thing. And if you look at, I've talked about him, I have a family member who, I think he's about 21 now, and he doesn't do a lot. He doesn't have a job. He didn't go to college. He didn't go in the military. He couldn't. And I'm concerned. And, when we talk, he says, well, or his mother will say, well, he just has so much anxiety. And I remember when I was a busboy at 14, and I lied about my age to get to be a busboy. Don't turn me in. And I remember my first few shifts, and in the busboys at this particular place was the dinner theater. We had to carry these trays of 16 dinners, and those metal covers that they put on the plates, and they stack them up. So there's 4 stacks of 4 plates on these, and it was heavy. And you had to carry those into the theater to the waitresses would then serve the food. And I was terrified. I mean, I didn't have any coordination or muscle memory of carrying a tray of dinners. I had to learn how to do that. And I had a lot of anxiety and I worried a lot about going to work. And I was trained and and I remember my first night and I remember my supervisor saying, if you can't start with 16, just start with 12. Meaning don't try to carry 16 the first time, just carry 12 dinners. And I remember I went to my very first waitress. I said, "Hi, my name is Pat. I'm your busboy tonight. I can carry 12 dinners." And she looked at me with her cigarette and said, "Honey, you're carrying 16. Like, don't don't bother, because if I only carried 12, then it would take twice as long to get her section, served. And she just said, no, you're carrying 16. Have at it. You know, now, anxious. My point is, I'm concerned about parents and anyone who tries to protect their children so much that they don't have to do anything. They don't are not challenged to do anything. I would never have gone to work if my mother had not told me to go to work. I would never have worked through the anxiety of starting a new job had I never started a new job. I would have never worked through the anxiety of grinding the gears and being screamed at by my brother if I didn't grind the gears and be screamed at by my brother. My brother and I are fine. Now, a few years later, he got over it. And I learned to drive. And I drive, like that. So think about those things. I do get concerned when we want to make excuses under the guise of our protection, or we want to, oh, I don't know. What are the cliches? I want them to have a better life than I did. I don't want them to go through what I did. And I think that's noble to a point. And there is the metaphor of the birds literally kicking the baby chicks out of the nest, kicking them out, and letting them fall. And I know as a teacher and a trainer and a coach and a mentor to many, many people, I've got your back and you've got to do it. I will be right here behind you. And I remember it was such a cute metaphor when I had graduate students in the ER, and I would have young, 22-year-old, 23-year-old, particularly young women in a trauma center. Now, what happens in a trauma center is a lot of blood and a lot of death and a lot of destruction and it's like a war zone. I mean, it is. If you think LA County level 1 trauma center in the 90s, war zone. Rodney King, O.J. Simpson, earthquakes, fires, floods, lions and tigers and bears. Oh my. And I just remember one day I had 2 new students and there was a trauma. Now, a trauma, and I'm not going to go into the details, but a trauma is called, it's a code over the loudspeaker. The trauma team is mobilized. The trauma team contains a host of people, a lot of people, nurses and doctors and techs and social work. And we're all gloving up, we're getting gowns. We know what's coming in a car accident, let's say, I don't remember. And I've got these 2 students, these young women, and I'm standing behind them because I kind of have done this before. And the paramedics roll in with the police in tow. There's, let's say there's CPR going on, or there's some injuries, right? There is blood. Sorry, people, that, watch the pit. Blood happens. It's a thing. It is real. And I am standing by, and I'm a large man, I'm 6 foot something. And these are 2 rather diminutive women. First day in the ER as their internship, right? To be to be a social worker, where we do the mental health stuff. But being part of the trauma team is a core competency of being in the ER, right? And I could see the color drain from their face, and I could feel them start to come back, and I just put my hand on their back, and I got a tech, and we had to kind of like assist them onto the floor because both of them passed out, and nobody got hurt. They were fine. And was that cruel and unusual punishment? Should I have said, no, stay in the office, close the door, lock yourself away, don't experience blood, don't experience death, don't experience what you're going to experience in the ER? That would not have served them, and I would not have been a very good teacher. And of course, they got to talk about that. They probably still talk about it, and it's controlled and it's safe. And I that's kind of what we do. We help each other go through those developmental milestones. So all the way back to the question: must it be hard? Must it be painful? Must we suffer? Now, there's a theory that yes, we must. just call it what it is. There are theories out there, religious theories. I think. I'm not going to quote Hinduism. I don't know enough about Hinduism, but I think there are several religious cultures, traditions where I remember years ago I dated a seminarian, going to be a Catholic priest. And I'm Buddhist, and the goal of Buddhist practice is enlightenment and happiness. So he and I are, no, not surprisingly, there was never any sex, seminarian. I don't know why I didn't get that he was going to be married to God, but I thought maybe before he got to be ordained, maybe there was a chance, but no such chance. It was cute. And of course we dated, for briefly, and he went on and became an ordained priest. And I remember saying, I'm not Catholic, I'm not even Christian, and I haven't been since I was 15. And I remember saying in my naivete, well, isn't the goal of religion to be happy? He looked at me and went, happy? And I went, just like that, like, happy? And I said, well, yeah, isn't it? Isn't religion, isn't the goal of spirituality and religion? He goes, well, I can't speak to spirituality, but I can tell you in the Catholic Church, the goal is to serve God. My goal is I serve God. He goes, maybe that's not for the rank and file of every Catholic around the world, but there is no agenda on my radar of me being happy. Me being happy might be a byproduct of being a Catholic priest. My job is to serve God. And so if you look at other religious traditions, spiritual traditions, martyrdom and suffering has been endemic in the human condition forever. Now, there is another saying that I really like, that while going through some pain, and even the Buddhists say this, they say that there are four noble truths. There's birth, there's sickness, there's old age, and there's death. And all humans, regardless of status, go through birth, old age, sickness, and death, no matter what. And it could be said that contained in those four noble truths, there's going to be some pain. You're going to hurt yourself. You're going to get sick. You're going to get older. And having lived 66 years on the planet, I'm here to tell you that that's true. Pain exists. Now, the Buddhists will say, many of them, that the pain is not optional, but suffering is. And I didn't understand what that meant. And then I watched my sister die of lung cancer. She didn't suffer at all, not even a little bit. There was pain. The biggest pain for my sister was she couldn't have a cigarette in the hospital. I'm telling you, and it was weird. 5 weeks from diagnosis to death. And she lived those last 5 weeks. And it was just so beautiful. I think she surrendered to her diagnosis. She didn't want any further treatment. She didn't go with chemo or radiation or anything like that. Or the early stages, 5 weeks, we were in the hospital and they did some sort of treatments. I forget what they were. It was many, many years ago. And we would walk down with her IV pole to the cigarette lounge in the hospital. It shows you how long ago it was. The cigarette lounge in the hospital. And I just said to her, and it was Sue, I said, Sue, so are you telling me that smoking is more important than your life? And she just laughed and she said, well, clearly it is and has been, that I've always been a smoker. My mom was a smoker. My dad was a smoker. And she said, and I said, so you don't want to quit? She goes, oh, Pat, she said in her way, it's too late. The horses have left the barn, or something like that. I forget the cliche. It's too late now. Even if I quit smoking, it's not going to make a difference. So she said, so I might as well enjoy my remaining time. And I enjoy smoking and I enjoy Pepsi, and I'm going to have as much Pepsi and as much cigarettes as I want. I'm going to give myself that. And she never once complained. She never complained of pain. She never whined about, oh poor me, and she had lived a good life. She'd lived a hard life. She had made great strides, and she was truly how to die with dignity. Wow. Now, she ended up moving in from the acute care hospital to a rehab hospital to a nursing home type place, right? To hospice. It was a thing. And she got caught so many times. I have to laugh, sneaking cigarettes in the bathroom. And in fact, shortly before she died, and I don't really talk about this, which I can say it with a smile on my face, because she died as she lived, and she did whatever she wanted, and she marched to her own drum, and she was in the bathroom sneaking a cigarette and actually fell and hit her head on the sink and was knocked unconscious. And it was a pretty bad, and again, she was a do not resuscitate. She didn't die from that, but she, was clearly not doing well. She was in her last stages, but she'd get out of that bed, man, get over to the bathroom, light up a cigarette, and she would get caught, and she didn't care. And she did end up falling and hitting her head, and she died a few days later after that, peacefully. Never a complaint. So her point of view would be pain is not optional, suffering is optional. So I would ask you to look at that distinction. You're Then the question is why, if we're so enlightened and we know about past lives and we're spiritual, why don't we know this? Or why can't we remember? You know? And I do a lot of past lives, and I have them go to their deathbed. And I say things, any trauma, you're gonna not see that. You're not gonna have any pain whatsoever as you transition. And nobody ever does. Everybody just kind of seemingly transitions to the other side and comes back or whatever. And this is in their mind's eye. It's a hypnotic visualization process. Um, and apparently, as another theory goes, my good friend Brian Weiss, we have done this many, many times, and that the Earth School is to teach us how to be closer to our Creator. Now, that is very, very different in different traditions, and I don't really care what you call it, source, the mystic law, God, whatever it is. But that's consistent throughout cultures, throughout the world, forever. And so this idea of my veteran who after a year is like just super perfectionistic and just it was this week. Yeah, today's Friday. It was this week. I said, "Do you have an expectation that you should be super happy all the time and have no challenges and no depression and no anxiety and never ever struggle?" He goes, "Well, kind of. Isn't that what therapy's for?" I said, "Well, you started, this session by saying that you've made such great strides and that that's really excellent that you've made such great strides. Can you give yourself some credit for that? That, from multiple panic attacks a day to none? Can we acknowledge that?" And so I'll say to you, how, how are you doing? How do you know when it's time to get help and what kind of help would be helpful, if you will? Um, there's one point of view that therapy can be helpful to everyone. And then there are people who will never avail themselves. They keep their, cards close to the vest, as we say, which is totally fine. It's really about your seeking spirit. And are you interested in exploring some of the reasons for and challenges that you're facing? Um, at every turn in the lifespan of the human, there are challenges. I had a lady this week also, a 50-year-old, who now has an empty nest. And she's a very healthy 50-year-old, a very youthful, vibrant 50-year-old. And I said to her, "So what are you going to do for the next 50 years?" Just stopped her dead in her tracks. "What?" I said, "Well, I don't know. You're young, you're healthy, you could live to be 100." She goes, "Well, my family's very long lived. It's likely that I'll be living till 100. I said, "Okay, so what do you want to do?" Raised her kids, business, marriage, met all of those things. And now she's at a juncture of what's next. And she has no idea. So that's why she's coming to me. And that's a perfect place, you know? And we have a therapist here uh, who's 86 years old and raising her two teenage granddaughters. She's just amazing. She's not done, not even close to be done. My mom always said, "Honey, you're not going to have to bury me. I'm just going to drop dead one day." And she did. Boom, heart attack in her sleep. Never knew it hit her. And she saw it coming and she lived until she died. Yeah. She was a piece of work, and she never, again, another one, never complained, never uttered one. The thing is, now I'm making the noises she used to make when she would get up. Like, I mean, for those of you who are my age or older, you know what I'm talking about. You make all these weird noises when you get up, or you moan and groan and things ache. It's humbling. Um, and I remember thinking to her, like, "Mom, must you make those noises when you get up from a seated position?" When you bend over to pick something on the floor, must you groan quite so much? Yes, apparently we do. It's what we do at this age. So I have a newfound admiration for my mom. So I want you to consider, what would progress look like for you? Not perfection. Are you on path? Are you meeting your needs well? I mean, do you feel, and I don't think, and I've done another video about the 10 worlds. The Buddhists don't believe that rapture and bliss is like the end. Rapture and bliss, kind of happiness, is sort of in the middle of the 10 life states. And so they don't even hold like the rapture, the Christian version of the rapture. They hold that about mid-range in terms of happiness, and that happiness, if you look at material happiness, having nice things or having material wealth or whatever, the Buddhists kind of look at that not as a criticism that that's a wonderful thing. In fact, it's the Buddhists that say earthly desires equal enlightenment in my brand of Buddhism, meaning, yes, if you want to fulfill yourself by being successful and having money and having material things, absolutely, that can be a great fuel for your happiness and your evolution as a human. No judgment. The Hawaiians said the same thing. Uncle George said the same thing in our Hawaiian tradition, where they love their technology and they love nice things, and there's nothing wrong with wealth. In fact, point of view of many people is that, part of enlightenment, part of being a well-rounded individual, is being successful to a reasonable extent, money-wise. Now, I will tell you, and I've said this to you before, that I work with several billionaires, and the billionaires that I have worked with over the years have been some of the most miserable people I've worked with. By their own definition, they come into therapy and they go, "Well, Jesus, I have," speaking of religion, "Jesus, I have achieved anything and everything way more than I ever thought. Why am I so miserable?" And then we work through that. That's what their therapy is about. They can't buy it, right? And then I've worked with homeless people who are just fine, totally fine. They want to be homeless. And I'm not, this isn't a political debate. I worked for a decade in a Los Angeles trauma center, and a core part of my clientele were homeless drug addicts and alcoholics. And I'm going to tell you, some of the most happy people. And when in my, forgive me, white bread version of what I think they need, they looked at me and said, "Why would I want any of that?" You know, and I was shocked. This is my learning, right? Because I would think, well, don't you want a house? Don't you want a job? Don't you want to live somewhere warm? Don't you want to have things? Don't you want a car? They didn't. They got, let's say they were on disability, they got $1,000 a month, whatever that, that's rough. Meaning, I don't know, it's different. Don't quote me on that. Disability is $1,000 a month. It's different all over the country. But they would get their check. They chose to spend their check on alcohol or drugs, and that's what they wanted to do. Not unlike my sister's cigarettes and Pepsi, right? She wanted her cigarettes and she wanted her Pepsi. Well, Johnny in the ER coming in at night because it's cold, saying he has chest pain, to get a bed, to get a meal, to get a change of clothes and a shower and a place warm to sleep for the night, right? I come in the morning as the ER social worker and I say, "Oh, Johnny's back," right? Johnny's back. "Johnny, we have a beautiful shelter over here. We have a sobering station over here. We have a rehab here. We have a psychiatric hospital here at the hospital. Don't you want mental health treatment? Don't you want rehab? Don't you want a sobering station? Don't you want me to bring the chaplain in? Don't you want?" It's like, "No, good, dude, I'm good." And then, and these were often male, I would say mostly male, and often older than me at the time. I was 30, but in their 50s, 60s, maybe. And they had so much wisdom. And but now remember, they're waking up. It's the morning. I'm serving them breakfast, essentially, waking up to the social worker. And I knew them because they were frequent flyers. And so it was just a wonderful, I would come in at 6 a.m. And my first task as an ER social worker was to empty out the ER for the overnight boarders, if you will. And I learned so much from them. And they would say to me, "You have to understand, I get a check, I get to do what I want, I get to go where I want. Nobody is the boss of me. I have to follow no rules. I live under the bridge, or I live in the park, or I have my cardboard box, or I have my shopping cart, or whatever. And please make no mistake, there is a fallacy that all homeless people are mentally ill, and all homeless people are drug addicts, and all homeless people are, super duper crazy. I think that there is a strong statistical percentage of them that are. And even within that, when I say to Johnny, I have a shelter, he says, "Oh, I've been to that shelter." You have to be out by 7 a.m. You have to be looking for jobs. You have to have a resume. You have to be looking for jobs. You have to be doing this and that. You have to come in at a certain time. You can't do this. You can't do that. You can't have this. You can't have that. You can't drink. You can't use drugs. You can't. And there's rules like, he goes, "I'm really not interested in following those rules." And again, in the social work context, we have this thing called right to client self determination. And I learned long ago that people need to find their own way. We can shepherd them, we can coach them, we can help them, and ultimately it's their path. So, long-winded answer to the what how do you know when it's time to get help? How do you know when you would be served by seeking treatment of any kind? And I'll give you a few things and we'll be done. All humans, and I've worked with a lot of humans, have mood variations. All humans are depressed sometimes. All humans get anxious. All humans get sad. All humans get angry, like that. If you have had a period of a negative emotion for 2 weeks or longer, and it feels debilitating and it's getting in the way of you doing your life the way you want it, meaning you're missing work, you're missing school, you can't focus, you're having a hard time doing your typical activities of daily living. If you're a student, you're having trouble studying, you can't concentrate, your grades are slipping, you find yourself self-medicating with alcohol or drugs just to kind of numb, take the chill out, take the edge off rather, and you feel a little out of control, then it would be time to at least get a consultation. And I'm going to be pretty specific in my recommendations today. In every county in the United States, there is a mental health county facility, a clinic of some sort where you can go for free if you have no money. Where I like to start, and I tell people, and this isn't not an endorsement of Psychology Today, it's just what I happen to use. www.psychologytoday, spelled out, all lowercase.com. And there is a square button that says find a therapist. I am listed there. Therapists that are there are vetted, they're licensed, they have to renew their license. And so these are all fully licensed, accredited, credentialed, real therapists. And you can search by ability to pay, by insurance, by gender, by specialty, and there are thousands and thousands and thousands of them nationwide. You can search by zip code, and you can say, 89102 is my zip code, sliding scale, or free, or Medicaid, or Anthem, or whatever it is, and it's searchable. It's a database. All therapists of any worth will do a free consultation. And so if you feel like you need some support that you're not getting and you want to do it anonymously and safely, www.psychologytoday.com, click on the button on the homepage called Find a Therapist and just do a consultation. It'll be 15 minutes or 30 minutes. It'll be free. And they may suggest that you come in to see them, or they may say, "Look, I don't, either I don't take your insurance, or I don't, this is a specialty," and they'll refer you out. But please take care of yourselves, because nobody else is going to if you don't. And my concern is that if you go down, we all lose. Under some, dying on the vine kind of thing, if you go down, your family loses, your job loses, you lose, we lose. So I say, take care of yourself. And that is almost a full hour today. So I wish you well. I'm going to be in Hawaii the next 3 weeks. So there will not be a Facebook Live for the next, well, maybe the third week there might be. But wish me well. I will see you soon. Aloha. Keakua.